All right, let's jump right into this explainer of Amylyx Pharmaceuticals Q1 2026 earnings and really map out their impending clinical catalyst countdown. If you've been following the biotech space at all lately, you know that 2026 is shaping up to be an absolute make or break year for Amylyx. We're going to break down their recent quarterly update, but we're going beyond just reading off the numbers. We want to understand the strategic chess moves they're making ahead of some seriously massive data readouts. Now, right out of the gate, as analysts, the question we need to answer today is what exactly the market is waiting for and whether Amylyx actually has the fundamentals to support and maybe even exceed this $1.62 billion market cap. Evaluation at this level for a clinical stage biotech means the market is already pricing in some pretty big expectations, but obviously there's a healthy amount of intrinsic risk baked in there too. So, who is Amylyx? They're a clinical stage biotech company. And let me tell you, they operate with a profound sense of urgency in the neurodegenerative and endocrine disease space. They aren't just hunting for tiny incremental improvements. No, they are targeting severe conditions that have massive unmet needs. This is a company that's truly built its whole identity on moving fast, collaborating tightly with patient communities, and just tackling really complex biology head-on. Here's our game plan for today. We'll start with a quick Q1 snapshot, assess their financial bedrock, and then dive deep into their primary catalyst, Avexitide. After that, we'll explore the broader pipeline, check up on operations and insider activity, and finally map out the road to 2027. Let's get into it. Starting off with Section 1, a high-level snapshot of exactly what Amylyx pulled off in the first quarter of 2026. What really stands out to me here is just execution. They're not sitting on their hands waiting for trial results. They're pushing clinical trials forward while doing the heavy lifting for regulatory filings at the exact same time. Fully enrolling their Phase 3 LUCIDITY trial, that is a massive de-risking event for their timeline. Plus, launching an expanded access program shows real confidence in their drug and a genuine commitment to patients who desperately need help right now. They're also aggressively prepping their NDA, their new drug application, so that if the data comes back positive, they won't waste months just getting their paperwork in order. Moving right along to Section 2, let's talk about the company's bedrock, financial health. Because in biotech, your science is literally only as good as your balance sheet allows it to be. When you look at how they're deploying capital, you can clearly see the contrast between the massive R&D engine powering the science and the SG&A overhead that's prepping for commercialization. They're sitting on just under $280 million in cash, with a quarterly net loss of about $41 million. The math here is actually really solid. R&D expenses are at $27.6 million, which is exactly what you want to see. Heavy investment in the actual science, mostly driven by Avexitide's clinical development. Meanwhile, SG&A is hovering at $16.2 million, which shows they're being disciplined while still scaling up the necessary professional services for potential launch. And here is the absolute kicker from the CFO, that cash runway extends into 2028. Why does that matter? Well, it gives the company and us as analysts the peace of mind to focus 100% on the upcoming science without sweating over immediate dilution fears. In a macro environment where capital can be incredibly expensive to raise, knowing Amylyx doesn't have to go back to the well before their major milestones play out, that's a huge strategic advantage for the investment thesis. All right, Section 3. Let's zoom in on the most imminent value driver for the company, the investigational drug Avexitide. This is exactly what the market is laser-focused on right now. But before we geek out over the data, we really need to understand the severe medical need here. PBH, or post-bariatric hypoglycemia, currently has 0 FDA-approved therapies. 0. Basically, after certain bariatric surgeries like a gastric bypass, some patients develop this wildly exaggerated GLP-1 response whenever they eat. This triggers a massive, totally inappropriate insulin spike, which leads to dangerous, terrifying drops in blood sugar. We're talking confusion, seizures, even losing consciousness. It's an awful way to live. Avexitide is uniquely designed to act as a GLP-1 receptor antagonist. It essentially blocks that exaggerated response and stabilizes the patient's blood sugar. To put the market opportunity into perspective, we're looking at an estimated 160,000 people living with PBH in the US alone following gastric bypass surgeries. And Amylyx didn't just pull that number out of thin air. They validated it through independent claims analysis, looking at patients with a history of bariatric surgery who present with severe non-diabetic hypoglycemia. That is a very substantial market for a specialized orphan-like drug, especially when there's literally no other approved alternative out there. And that brings us to the main event, the LUCIDITY trial. It's a race to the finish line with a huge Q3 2026 data readout. This is a 78-participant, strictly placebo-controlled phase 3 trial. The primary endpoint is the real key here. They need to show a reduction in level 2 and level 3 hypoglycemic events over a 16-week period. Just for context, level 2 means your blood glucose drops below 54 milligrams per deciliter, which is danger territory for the brain. And level 3 means the patient physically needs someone else's help just to recover. The good news? 5 prior phase 2 trials already showed statistically significant reductions in these events. Now it all comes down to replicating that exact success in this pivotal phase 3. Let's pivot to section 4, expanding the clinical pipeline. Let's see how this all builds out. Proving Amylyx is definitely not a one-trick pony. While Avexitide is the immediate catalyst, the broader pipeline actually has some serious depth and momentum. Take AMX 0035 for Wolfram syndrome, for example. It just yielded positive week 48 data, showing stabilization in critical areas like pancreatic function and vision, and they're already gearing up for phase 3 trial. They're also developing AMX 0318, which is a next-generation, long-acting drug for PBH currently in preclinical studies. They're aiming for an IND filing in 2027. This tells us they are actively thinking about lifecycle management and maintaining a dominant grip on the PBH space for the long haul. And for those of you tracking the ALS space, keep your eyes peeled this June. The data coming out will give us the first critical glimpse into AMX 0114's biological activity. It's an antisense oligonucleotide targeting calpain-2. In June, we're going to see early biomarker data from cohort 1 of their phase 1 trial. Specifically, everyone is going to be watching the neurofilament light chain, or NFL, levels. Now, even though this is an early, low-dose cohort, any signal whatsoever that the drug is engaging the target and lowering NFL will be a massive win, and honestly, an entirely separate value driver for the stock. All right, section 5. Let's bring things back down to earth with a reality check on commercial operations and some recent insider stock movements. Because let's be real, even the best science doesn't sell itself. The company is actively laying the groundwork right now. They're validating claims data and building out a rare endocrine sales force, so they're ready to hit the ground running the absolute second approval happens. They aren't waiting for that Q3 data to start marketing. In fact, they're launching an education campaign this summer just to raise doctor awareness. And here's a crucial detail. The government is introducing a specific ICD-10 medical billing code for PBH in October 2026. I know, billing codes sound incredibly mundane, but it's actually massive. A dedicated code means patients can be easily tracked across medical systems, which makes commercialization infinitely smoother. Now, I want to touch on something that often spooks investors: insider selling. Context is everything here. If you only read the headlines, you'd think co-CEO Joshua Cohen just dumped $1.9 million worth of stock right before a major catalyst. But dig a little deeper, and you see it was actually a routine, non-discretionary transaction. He exercised options, and the shares were sold automatically just to cover the tax hit and the cost of the exercise. His actual direct holdings only dropped by about 3.9%, leaving him with well over 3.3 million shares. So it's standard corporate procedure, not the CEO abandoning ship before bad news. Finally, let's wrap this up in section 6 by synthesizing everything into a clear, forward-looking roadmap. Let's map out exactly what you need to be watching. This timeline bridges their financial runway with the upcoming clinical events. It kicks off fast. June brings us that ALS biomarker data, a really nice appetizer. But the main course, without a doubt, is Q3 2026. The LUCIDITY top-line data is the definitive make-or-break moment for Avexitide. Right after that, the new ICD-10 billing code goes live in October to prime the market. And if that Q3 data actually holds up, all of this culminates in a potential commercial launch in 2027. So, bringing it all together, ultimately, the science has to deliver. It leaves us with the million, or rather billion-dollar question. Will Q3's LUCIDITY data be the spark that totally transforms the PBH landscape and validates this company's future? Look, they've got the cash runway into 2028, and they're building out the commercial infrastructure as we speak. Now, we just wait for the data. Keep a very close eye on that Q3 window. That's all for this explainer. Thanks for joining me today, and keep learning.